pressure doesn't reveal character, how we perform under pressure. It reveals how regulated the nervous system really is. And in order to regulate that nervous system close to optimally, we really need a lot of rest periods. You can buy cheap devices now, watches, wristbands, rings, and so on, that can track this balance between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system 24/7. There's so much gold to dig in terms of figuring out what happens every minute of the day and how does it influence my nervous system. It was a revelation for me that this is a very healthy state to be in, this kind of mindless state. Mindlessness is a real game changer. People have for thousands of years wanting to know what's going on inside of us, and now we have that window to look into our unconsciousness.
Welcome to the podcast that helps you build behaviors that drive achievement through discipline. Today, we'll talk about performance under pressure with neuroscientist and neuroeconomist Jon Wegener. Jon is a neuroeconomist, author, and lecturer who studies how emotions, attention, and the brain shape financial decisions. He co-authored the Café Latte Rule in Danish, focusing on practical ways to design better money habits, avoid emotional traps, and build long-term wealth through realistic brain-based strategies. Welcome, Jon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Actually, second time, so I'm very happy to have you back. Last time we talked more about turning bad money habits into constructive behaviors. Now we go into performance, tapping more into your neuroscience background. You study how non-consciousness impacts our decision-making. And you have this focus also on well-being, which is so important in today's hustle culture, right? So I think you will be great in busting some of these myths and misconceptions about what's happening in our brain under these pressure moments. Also help people use simple practical strategies to perform better under pressure in everyday life. Because many people still think that learning how to perform under pressure is only relevant for high-performance athletes, elite operators, but in reality, we face pressure moments every day. So starting off, like, how important do you think is learning about performing under pressure, not only for better results, but also in general for your well-being?
It's obviously very important. I mean, I think it's good to say as a start that the pressure doesn't reveal character. I mean, how we perform under pressure, it reveals how regulated the nervous system really is. So this is all about regulating the nervous system in optimal ways or close to optimal ways, right? That's of course maybe the paradox. Usually people who are very focused on achieving optimal performance are quite stressed people because they place a lot of pressure on themselves and expect of themselves that they should always perform optimally. And then it itself can be a problem because that will certainly probably leave out many of the situations that are necessary in order to actually perform optimally, namely that you need rest, right? You need a lot of rest. You need exercise. You shouldn't drink alcohol ever. And then, which is, of course, very difficult to follow for most people. But the idea is we need that regulated nervous system. And in order to regulate that nervous system close to optimally, we really need a lot of rest periods. When we feel this pressure to perform, that is stressful in itself, to expect that of yourself.
Understood. So you mentioned it's about regulating the nervous system. A couple of things that come to mind there, because obviously high performance athletes prepare for that stress, train with intensity and stress, right? But
Certainly.
when you train your nervous system to do better?
It is about finding that balance because maybe many of your listeners know that we have a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system where the sympathetic nervous system is what activates us. What is activated when we fight or when we flight, or I mean when we are when we feel we are under pressure, the sympathetic nervous system is activated. But we need that balance with the sort of rest and digest activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. So finding that balance is really key to optimizing performance under pressure. And as you also revealed, this is not about character. This is about repeating what's good for you and identifying what you call maladaptive, identifying periods where you're under intense stress and figuring out whether it's actually worth it, right? Because we have limited resources. We have to be careful about how much our sympathetic nervous system is activated. You can buy cheap devices now, right? There are different kind of watches, wristbands, rings, and so on that can track this balance between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system 24/7, right? So I think, and that, I mean, I've done this for 7 years myself. I mean, I like Garmin, so I know the Garmin sort of universe best. But the idea that you can actually track this balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system is a way to measure our non-consciousness. I mean, how does our body and mind really feel? Because one thing is how we think it feels, but we have very limited access to our own non-consciousness, right? For me, it's an obvious way to go about it, to begin measuring it, right? Because it measures 24/7. This HRV measurement, the heart rate variability, right, which is a really good measurement of the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic activation. That's a good way to go about it, because in that sense, you can identify periods where you are under intense stress and identify periods where you're under very little stress. And I think, I think that's a key uh, data point that is very useful for all of us, really.
So a couple of things come to mind that I think we should go deeper, but just summarizing them. Recovery, mindlessness, and tech. Three very important aspects, right, that you mentioned right now, right? So technology now enables you to track practically everything. And we moved from these early generation devices that tracked steps into these very
Yes.
sophisticated devices that you mentioned right now, Garmin, Whoop, which now becomes integrated into high performance sports, like NFL is allowing athletes to use it, right? Lots of marketing as well, right? So there is a little bit of, I think, a debate there whether this is a medical device, which will change the way you collect data, etc. Right? But I think you're highlighting the opportunity that now technology allows you to audit these pressure moments with your own data and actually do something about it, right? Right. Is this how a neuroscientist, right, actually like performs under pressure better, right? So you're using technology to be able to track your emotional moments or pressure moments and act better. I'd love to hear a little bit like how you do it in more detail.
Sure. Yeah, we could go many ways about it, but let's start with this. I mean, I think most of us know that mindfulness, meditation, I mean, practices where you focus on very few things at a time, right? You focus on your breathing, or you focus on some kind of body awareness where you, for example, if we right now just feel our left big toe, that in itself is a form of mindfulness that has measurable effects on activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So, but what I also like is in a way the opposite. You mentioned it yourself, mindlessness,
Mhm.
where we do absolutely nothing, where we just let our thoughts completely drift, like, just stare out the window with sort of this sort of blank stare, right? This 1,000-mile stare where we don't really focus on anything. We just sort of daydream and just let Yeah, I think it's in a way it's the opposite thing of being mindful, right?
Hmm.
Because then you focus on one or a few things at a time, and mindlessness is just letting it completely drift. And what science has revealed is that we have similar effects of both of these, mindfulness and mindlessness. So that's a real sort of thing of mine, that to really uh, try to popularize the notion of mindlessness, right? Because sometimes it's something we push ourselves out of, right? If I don't know, if you had kids, I mean, I have a daughter, and usually something in the past is something when they just sit there and stare, we sort of tell them, "Then you have to do something, right? Don't
Yeah.
just sit there," right? So I think it was a revelation for me a few years back when I figured out that there's so much good science supporting the fact that this is a very healthy state to be in, this kind of mindless state. So I think using mindfulness and mindlessness whenever it feels right is certainly good, very good ways of very quickly get into sort of this parasympathetic activation where we are completely relaxed and don't think any stressful thoughts. Or I'm a large proponent of using both of these methods, however they fit, because some people have a hard time doing meditation or mindfulness. And then I think, yeah, mindlessness is a real game changer, because it's in a way so easy to do, and we do it automatically. Most of us every day, we just don't notice it.
Uh, just to follow up from the previous aspect, you mentioned this heart rate variability, and this is one of the health metrics, right? Also tracking sleep, tracking recovery. Athletes do that all the time, right? To be able to perform better. So it's both the training with intensity, but also recovery being so important for performance. What does that mean for us, right? When we work or we are back, could you maybe will give me an example? It would be a little bit easier for also our audience to understand the recovery in real terms. Maybe we only think about recovery as sleep.
Yes, certainly. That's why those breaks we can have during the day are also
Mm.
very important. And of course, there is a correlation between how much pressure you feel during the day, again, comparable to athletes, which most of us who are not athletes don't have that kind of peak performance every day, the very high intensity. But of course, the more you have of that, the the more breaks you need, right? And again, back to recording it with some device, because it doesn't lie, the device, right? Which I love. It's completely objective. It doesn't care about anything other than measuring this heart rate variability, or something that at least has heart rate variability within the algorithm. So I think I think it's I think it's very important, because we are all individuals and we are all different in some ways. So I think it's very important that to treat yourself as an individual and get one of these devices, use this data output. They're so cheap, those
Mm.
devices, right? A few €100 or something, right? And so to really begin to track your own days and see, because I mean, at least Garmin has a time resolution of 3 minutes, which is pretty good, about 3 minutes, 24/7 of this kind of HRV related measurement. They call it all day stress, but other brands call it something else. But to really, detect what was I doing at that time during the day. You can synchronize it with your calendar. Who was I talking to on the phone,
Mm.
right? Who did I meet? What did I do? And really take it seriously, because most people will realize that there'll be some surprises there in terms of who you interact with, who makes you relaxed, truly, and who makes you stressed, right? Sometimes you'll realize that people we think we really like, they actually stress us, right? So I think that there's so much. I mean, there's so much gold to dig in terms of figuring out how does my day go, and what happens every minute of the day, and how does it influence my nervous system? Because it has such great impact on our performance and well-being and health and everything important in life. So again, muscle activation is also a very effective way of reducing stress, right? Because remember, stress is really, I mean, biologically speaking, stress is a preparation for muscle activation,
Mm.
right? Fight or flight, for example, right? So there's definitely many ways that men and women differ, including how they handle stress and pressure. Also laughing. Laughing really hard is also reduces stress. Is again this thing about muscle activation, and we humans seem to be the only species that can become very stressed, but then not have any muscle activation, right? You sit there in front of the computer, you get a stressful email, and then you just sit there,
Yeah.
right? And feeling stressed. And that's toxic,
Mm.
right? And I think it's also important to remember also the seriousness of stress, because again, we're the only species that seem to can be stressed over and over again without muscle activation, and being overly stressed has a direct connection to immune function, right? So there's a direct connection with having chronic stress,
Mm.
right? To having the immune system making more mistakes, increasing the risk of autoimmune disorders and many other bad things in life. For me, it's just important to to say that yeah, this is not only about improving performance with having a better balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic activation, but it's also about long-term longevity. I mean, it is also about not becoming sick. So I think it's important to remember that aspect. This is not just about performing better. It's about living a long and healthy life. Again, back to well-being, as you also mentioned in the beginning. And that's of course we are really on our way to some kind of chronic stress, right, which is so toxic in every single way, and it impacts sleep and all. I mean, it impacts so many things. What we want to eat, and I mean it's just so bad in every single way. This freeze response. So that's uh, that's very important to get out of that
Mm.
freeze response, right? I think luckily today, when you receive this kind of difficult email and you have a hard time answering it in a good way, now use your favorite Gen AI
Yes, exactly.
to help you out, right? It's I mean I use it a lot,
Mm.
and I think it's so good.
Mm.
I mean, it's so good at taking me out of these situations that can, these everyday sort of situations that can be stressful, right? It's you basically just have an expert lawyer and an expert, on pretty much everything to help you out in these situations, right? So I have a lot of optimism um, related to the use of Gen AI in terms of reducing stress
Mm.
and quickly taking us out of these freeze situations.
Yes, definitely. Technology again can be an assistant if you use it right, as you mentioned before, with biometric tracking, right, or for your recovery or brain breaks, taking us out of the anxiety, writing the perfect email response.
Yeah.
Yes, that's actually a good tip. Now,
For me, it's a good starting point in terms of building new habits to look at that data. Who am I talking to? Which friends or family members? I mean, what am I working on? Right? That's fascinating, right? Because achieving that balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic activation, that's it feels like sort of a hack, right? It,
um,
it feels like you can really get into how this non-consciousness and how our body and mind really works. I mean, an insight you could never imagine having before. I think people have for thousands of years wanting to know what's going on inside of us, and now we have that window look into our unconsciousness, and I think it's a great start um, with building some new habits, building it upon real insights into your own unconsciousness. And to be honest, I mean, that's why I'm not so interested in performing brain scans and so on anymore, right? Because if anyone has been in an MR scanner, for example, it's very noisy, it's very artificial. You have head restraints on and all of these things, and you can only measure for minutes or maybe half an hour at a time. I mean, if you compare that to just this Whoop or Garmin or whatever, I mean, the data, the usefulness of the data is just so much better, right? Instead of like millions of euros and for a scanner, you can just 100 or 200 or 300 maybe euros. You can get much better insight into how our organism really works.
Understood. You talked about the science. You gave us a very good framework of how to audit these pressure moments, what to do to protect the environment, how to get back even if we fail, and also in the end, not tying the identity right of that successful performance into who we are to be able to progress. So it's been a very interesting discussion again. And John, thanks again for sharing your insights.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks again. And for everybody watching or listening, thanks a lot and see you in the next episode.